Some nights feel wider than they should. Not louder, not brighter, just wider. As if the world has quietly stepped back, leaving more space than usual for thought to stretch for time to loosen its grip. You might be lying still now, aware of the room without needing to look at it. The ceiling feels farther away. The air feels patient. Nothing is asking you to hurry. In moments like this, the mind doesn't rush toward answers. It listens instead. It drifts through impressions the way a hand moves slowly through water, feeling shape without trying to name it. You may notice that the night itself seems to breathe differently. Sounds soften. Even silence has texture. Not empty, but full of things continuing quietly beyond your attention. This is where curiosity changes. During the day, curiosity presses forward. It wants explanations, diagrams, certainty. It asks questions sharply, expecting clean replies. But at night, curiosity lowers its voice. It doesn't interrogate, it observes. It waits. And waiting, it turns out, is where science began. Long before equations and instruments, there was noticing. Someone pausing long enough to realize that something repeated, that something shifted slowly, that something invisible still had weight. Science did not start with control, it started with patience. Tonight belongs to that earlier version of knowing, the one that doesn't demand clarity right away, the one that understands that some truths arrive only when they are not being chased. You're not here to learn in the traditional sense. There will be no test, no conclusion you're expected to remember. What unfolds tonight doesn't need to be held tightly. It only needs space to exist. Before we go any further, let me pause with you for just a moment. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these quiet journeys, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe, if you'd like more stories told softly, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. Now, let's drift. Nothing dramatic is about to happen. No curtain is being pulled back. The world we'll move through tonight has always been here, operating steadily, whether anyone was paying attention or not. Beneath cities and forests, beneath oceans and deserts, processes unfold with remarkable patience. Energy moves, fields shift, patterns repeat. Most of it happens without witnesses. And yet here you are, listening. You might feel your breathing slow slightly. Not because you're trying to relax, but because nothing requires alertness right now. When the mind senses there is no urgency, the body responds naturally. This story doesn't ask you to stay awake. It doesn't ask you to fall asleep either. It allows both. If your thoughts wander, that's fine. If they fade in and out, that's welcome too. You don't need to follow every sentence. Meaning doesn't arrive line by line here. It arrives the way understanding often does, in the middle of the night, indirectly, quietly, without announcement. Somewhere far above the earth, instruments are listening, not with ears, but with sensitivity. Measuring changes so subtle, they can't be felt, only accumulated. These measurements don't shout, they hum faintly over time. But tonight isn't about instruments yet. It's about the feeling of listening itself. About what happens when attention softens instead of sharpens. When curiosity is allowed to rest beside you, instead of pulling you forward. There's no image you need to hold in your mind, no scene to construct. This is not about visualization. It's about orientation, the sense of being gently placed within a larger rhythm. The planet continues to turn. The sky continues its slow choreography. Forces you never feel directly still shape every quiet moment of your life. Gravity holds, fields protect, energy flows where it always has. You don't need to grasp any of that right now. Just noticing that it exists is enough. Night has a way of reminding us that understanding is not always active. Sometimes it's receptive. Sometimes it's a willingness to be near something without naming it. That willingness matters. Because when knowledge is approached gently, it doesn't overwhelm. It doesn't demand. It becomes something you can drift alongside, the way you might drift beside a river without needing to know where it begins or ends. As the night deepens, you may feel less interested in outcomes and more comfortable with presence. That's not disengagement, that's alignment. You are exactly where you need to be. Nothing here depends on effort. Nothing requires precision. If sleep arrives early, the story will continue without you, just as it always does. And if you remain awake, that's fine too. The rhythm doesn't change. This opening is not a promise of revelation. It's an invitation to listen without pressure. To let science be what it was before it became loud, a quiet practice of attention, unfolding slowly in the dark. And if there's one thing worth holding on to as the night carries you forward, it's this simple permission. You don't need to understand everything. Just rest and let curiosity do the listening. The quiet remains not as an absence, but as a kind of background presence steady enough that your attention no longer needs to guard itself. And in that steadiness, something familiar begins to emerge, not as a thought, but as a rhythm you've known longer than memory. The earth turns, slowly, relentlessly. And research shows that this turning does more than separate day from night. It creates a repeating structure that living systems have adapted to for billions of years, shaping internal timing in ways that do not require awareness. Cells respond to light without asking why. Hormones rise and fall in cycles measured in hours, not minutes. Neural activity shifts as darkness settles, encouraging the brain to trade sharp focus for wider connection. You didn't choose this alignment. It was chosen for you. Long before language, long before intention. Life learned to survive by anticipating what would return. Daylight would come back. Darkness would follow. Predictability became safety, and safety allowed systems to soften instead of staying alert. Studies in chronobiology suggest that consistency more than intensity is what stabilizes biological rhythms, and that systems exposed to reliable cycles require less energy to maintain balance. You can feel that economy now. Nothing is being wasted. As external demands fade, attention begins to drift inward, not abruptly, but naturally, like a tide responding to forces it doesn't need to understand. The brain reduces its reliance on detailed sensory input and increases sensitivity to internal patterns, allowing regions associated with memory and emotion to communicate more freely. This shift does not feel like effort. It feels like easing back into something familiar. Thoughts appear, then loosen, then pass. Neuroscience shows that during low arousal states, especially in dim environments, the brain favors slower rhythms that support integration rather than analysis. These rhythms do not silence the mind, they coordinate it. Instead of competing for dominance, neural systems begin to synchronize, creating a sense of continuity without requiring clarity. That continuity matters. It's how experiences become meaningful without being revisited deliberately. Information gathered earlier does not vanish when attention fades. It circulates quietly, reinforced through repetition, rather than review, finding its place among older patterns that feel emotionally similar. This process allows learning to persist, even when you are no longer trying to learn. You may notice how naturally this feels, like remembering without effort. In the natural world, repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity allows relaxation. Nightfall arrives not as a command, but as a gradual shift in signals, telling muscles to release breathing, to deepen, and awareness to widen. Research suggests that when predictability increases, stress responses decrease, freeing cognitive resources for processes that do not require vigilance. This is why calm environments feel expansive rather than empty. They ask for nothing. As the body responds to this absence of urgency, the mind follows, no longer scanning for change, no longer preparing for action. Instead, it begins to notice patterns. It usually ignores the subtle connections between ideas, the emotional tone that links one memory to another. Nothing here is being emphasized sharply. That's intentional. Sharpness belongs to daylight, to precision, to speed. Night belongs to accumulation, to the slow layering of experience that allows understanding to form without pressure. This is where curiosity becomes quiet, no longer demanding answers, but allowing recognition to emerge on its own. You are not solving anything. You are aligning. The same principle governs physical systems. Energy absorbed during the day is not released all at once. It is redistributed, gradually radiating back into the environment long after the source has passed. In the same way, experiences do not resolve themselves immediately. They settle, they shift, they find their place over time. You can sense this settling now, in the body, in the mind. Muscles soften without instruction. The jaw releases. Breathing finds a slower rhythm. These are not techniques being applied. They are responses to stability, to the absence of threat, to the quiet reassurance that nothing unexpected is required right now. When the environment feels safe, the brain conserves energy. When energy is conserved, integration begins. Ideas encountered earlier return with less resistance. They feel familiar, even if their details are blurred. This is how knowledge becomes intuitive, not because it was simplified, but because it was revisited gently, allowed to blend with what was already there. Learning here does not feel like effort. It feels like recognition. The night supports this process without interruption. Light fades, sound softens, movement slows. The brain interprets these cues as permission to shift priorities away from action and toward consolidation, strengthening relationships between ideas rather than isolating them as facts. You don't need to cooperate with this shift. It happens anyway. The only requirement is that nothing interrupts it too sharply, and in this moment, nothing does. Awareness remains present without tension, suspended between knowing and not needing to know, held there by rhythms older than intention, steady enough to carry you forward without asking where you are going. You're still here, aware in a way that feels softer than attention, as if the mind has stepped slightly back from the front of itself, leaving room for quieter processes to move without being watched. The body is still. The room remains unchanged, and yet inside something subtle has begun to reorganize. The brain does this naturally when demands fall away. Research in neuroscience suggests that as external stimulation decreases, neural activity shifts towards slower rhythms, particularly those associated with rest and integration. These rhythms are not a sign of disengagement. They are a sign that different regions of the brain are beginning to coordinate rather than compete. You don't feel this as activity, you feel it as ease. When sensory input becomes less dominant, the brain no longer prioritizes precision. Vision relaxes first. Fine detail matters less. Then sound loses urgency. Direction softens. What remains is not emptiness, but a wider field of awareness where internal signals carry more weight than external ones. In this state, memory behaves differently. Instead of isolating details, it begins to link experiences by similarity of feeling. Events that shared an emotional tone earlier in the day drift closer together, even if they never touched in time or place. This is how continuity forms, not as a story, with a beginning and end, but as a sense that things belong together. You may notice this gently happening now. A thought surfaces, then another. Not connected by logic, but by familiarity. Neuroscientists often refer to this mode as the brain's default network, a system that becomes more active when the mind is not focused on a task. This network is associated with self-reflection, memory integration, and imagination. But it does not produce clear narratives. It produces cohesion. Cohesion feels calm. It's the difference between remembering facts and feeling that you understand something without knowing exactly why. During the day, attention fragments experience into pieces that can be managed quickly. At night, those fragments are allowed to rest beside one another, gradually finding alignment. This process relies on time, not effort. As neural rhythms slow, communication between regions involved in emotion and memory becomes more fluid. Studies suggest that this fluidity supports consolidation, the quiet strengthening of connections that makes learning last beyond conscious recall. Nothing new is added. What already exists is simply allowed to settle into place. You don't have to follow this settling. It happens on its own. The body mirrors this shift. Muscle tension reduces without instruction. Breathing deepens slightly. The nervous system interprets the stillness around you as safety, and safety reduces the need for vigilance. When vigilance decreases, internal processing becomes more efficient. Efficiency here doesn't mean speed, it means harmony. In natural systems, harmony emerges when competing forces are no longer pulling in opposite directions. Energy redistributes itself along the paths of least resistance. In the brain, this means fewer signals competing for attention and more signals reinforcing one another quietly. You may sense this as a gentle continuity, a feeling that the mind is whole rather than busy, not empty, just complete enough for the moment. Memory in this state is not replayed deliberately. It drifts. Images appear without context. Sensations return without explanation. A feeling lingers even when its origin is unclear. This is not forgetting. It is integration. Integration does not announce itself. It leaves behind something subtler. Familiarity. Comfort. The sense that experiences have found their place without being arranged. This is why nights like this feel restorative, even when nothing specific has been resolved. The brain is not solving problems. It is smoothing transitions. Emotion plays a quiet role here. Research suggests that memories associated with calm states integrate more smoothly than those associated with stress. Calm does not erase difficulty. It allows difficulty to settle without remaining sharp. You may notice how this softening spreads from thought to sensation. The boundary between thinking and feeling becomes less defined. Awareness widens enough to hold both without needing to separate them. This is where imagination appears not as fantasy, but as the brain's way of exploring connections without committing to conclusions. Imagination here is gentle. It borrows elements from memory and sensation, blends them lightly, then lets them go. No effort is required, no outcome is expected. The value lies in the movement itself, the quiet rehearsal of possibilities without consequence. This is why the night feels creative even when nothing is being created. The mind is exploring relationships rather than producing results. And exploration does not require urgency. As this continues, awareness remains present without tension. You are still listening, still aware of the space you occupy, but the need to track every thought has faded. What matters now is not clarity, but continuity. Continuity is comforting. It reassures the nervous system that experience is coherent even when it is not fully understood. That understanding does not have to be immediate to be real. That meaning can emerge gradually, shaped by repetition rather than force. The same rhythms that guide sleep guide this process. Slower brain activity supports deeper integration. Reduced sensory input lowers interference. Time provides the space necessary for connections to strengthen quietly. You don't have to remember any of this. Your brain already knows how to do it. And as this quiet work continues unobserved and unannounced, awareness remains gently balanced between knowing and not needing to know, carried forward by processes older than intention, steady enough to hold you without asking anything in return. You may notice that the world doesn't disappear when attention relaxes. It simply changes its language, becoming less precise and more atmospheric, as if your senses have agreed to stop competing and start cooperating instead. Edges blur without losing shape. Distance feels less important. Sound no longer insists on direction. Touch becomes about presence rather than detail. This shift is quiet, almost polite. Neuroscience suggests that as alertness decreases, sensory systems adjust their priorities. Vision, which dominates the waking mind, begins to loosen its grip. Fine detail matters less. Contrast softens. The brain no longer demands constant updates from the eyes, allowing other signals to rise gently into awareness. You feel this not as blindness, but as relief. Sound follows a similar path. Sharp distinctions fade. Instead of tracking where a sound comes from, the brain becomes more interested in whether it belongs. Familiar noises blend into a continuous background, forming a kind of auditory fabric that feels safe enough to ignore. Ignoring here is not neglect, it is trust. When sensory input becomes predictable, the nervous system conserves energy. Research shows that predictability reduces the need for constant monitoring, allowing deeper processes to unfold without interruption. The brain shifts from asking, "What is this?" to asking, "Is this safe?" And when the answer is yes, attention drifts inward naturally. Touch behaves differently as well. Pressure replaces texture. The exact shape of what you're resting on matters less than the fact that it's there. Proprioception. The sense of where your body is in space becomes more prominent, anchoring awareness gently without demanding analysis. You don't have to name any of this. Your body already knows. As sensory systems soften, the boundary between outer and inner experience becomes less distinct. External signals no longer dominate the flow of information, making room for internal sensations to speak more clearly. A subtle warmth, a gentle heaviness, the rhythm of breath moving without instruction. These sensations are not random. They are the result of long adaptation. The brain has learned that when stimulation drops and nothing changes suddenly, it is safe to redirect resources inward. This redirection supports processes that require time rather than speed, such as integration, emotional regulation, and the quiet rehearsal of memory. Memory in this state does not arrive as images. It arrives as feeling, a sense of familiarity without a source, a mood that seems to belong to more than one moment at once. Research suggests that when sensory input decreases, emotional context becomes a stronger organizing principle for memory, allowing experiences to cluster by how they felt rather than when they occurred. This is why the night feels thick with association. One sensation can call up many moments without summoning their details. The mind does not sort them, it lets them overlap. Overlap is efficient. It allows the brain to preserve meaning without preserving noise. Instead of replaying events exactly as they happened, it retains the emotional patterns that made them matter, This is not distortion, it is refinement. The subconscious plays a larger role here, not as a hidden force, but as a collection of processes that operate without requiring awareness. When attention relaxes, these processes are no longer overshadowed by deliberate thought. They surface quietly, shaping perception without announcing themselves. You may feel this as intuition, or as comfort, or simply as ease. The brain does not interpret these signals as information to be acted on. It treats them as background guidance, a gentle calibration of internal state. Hormonal activity shifts. Stress-related signals reduce. Systems associated with repair and regulation become more active. None of this feels dramatic. That's the point. In the natural world, stability rarely announces itself. It persists. The same is true here. As sensory demands lessen, internal balance becomes more noticeable. Not because it is new, but because it is no longer being drowned out. You may notice that thoughts are less insistent now. They pass through awareness like slow-moving clouds, visible but not demanding attention. This is not the absence of thinking. It is thinking without urgency. Urgency belongs to the senses when they are sharp. Calm belongs to the senses when they soften. When vision no longer demands detail, imagination gains room to move. When sound no longer requires tracking, memory finds space to wander. When touch no longer analyzes texture, the body settles into gravity without resistance. Gravity here is comforting. It reminds the nervous system that support is present, that nothing needs to be held up deliberately. This sense of being held reduces the need for muscular tension, which in turn feeds back into emotional calm. The system settles in, loops each reinforcing the other gently. This is how the body and mind negotiate rest. Not through command, but through agreement. Sensory systems agree to relax. Internal systems agree to take over. Awareness agrees to watch without interference. You are not directing this process, you are allowing it. The subconscious does not rush when given space. It works at a pace suited to depth rather than speed. Patterns emerge slowly. Connections strengthen quietly. What does not belong fades without being pushed away. This is why rest feels intelligent. It is not passive, it is selective. The brain chooses what to keep based on relevance rather than recency, guided by emotional tone and repetition rather than conscious priority. As this continues, awareness remains anchored by sensation rather than thought. The feeling of contact, the steadiness of breath, the gentle rhythm of internal processes moving without instruction. You are still present, just not busy. The world outside continues, of course, but it no longer needs to be tracked. Sensory systems have done their job. They have confirmed stability. Now they step back, allowing the deeper work of integration to proceed without interruption. In this softened sensory landscape, learning feels less like acquiring information and more like becoming familiar. Familiar with your own rhythms, familiar with the way calm organizes experience, familiar with the idea that understanding does not always require attention. It can arrive quietly, and as the senses continue to rest together, awareness remains gently balanced between outer perception and inner continuity, supported by processes designed to function best when nothing is being demanded of them, steady enough to carry you forward without effort or expectation. There is a moment when effort fades so completely that something else takes its place, something softer than thought, less defined than intention, and yet quietly confident in the way it moves through you. You don't notice it arriving. You simply notice that decisions no longer feel necessary, that awareness seems to know where to rest without being guided. This is intuition in its calmest form, not a voice, not a message, just a sense of alignment that doesn't ask to be explained. Neuroscience suggests that when the brain is no longer occupied with managing sensory detail or maintaining alertness, internal networks associated with pattern recognition become more influential. These networks do not work through conscious reasoning. They work by comparing the present moment with countless past experiences stored quietly in memory, searching for resemblance rather than logic. You feel this as a subtle certainty. Not certainty about facts, but certainty about direction. A feeling that something fits or doesn't without knowing exactly why. This is not guesswork. It is recognition operating below the level of language. During the day, intuition is often drowned out by speed. There is too much input, too many demands, too many signals competing for priority. But at night, when those signals soften, intuition has room to surface without interruption. You're not trying to access it. It emerges on its own. The brain, when calm, becomes exceptionally good at detecting coherence. Research shows that relaxed states enhance the brain's ability to integrate information across regions, allowing emotional memory, bodily sensation, and past experience to inform perception simultaneously. This integration feels effortless because it bypasses deliberate analysis. Analysis asks questions. Intuition answers without speaking. You may notice how this feels in the body. A slight easing in the chest, a sense of settling in the stomach, muscles that no longer brace. These physical signals are not random. They are part of the same system feedback loops that inform the brain about internal safety and balance. When the body feels safe, intuition becomes clearer. Safety reduces noise. Noise reduction allows patterns to stand out. The brain no longer has to filter aggressively, so subtle consistencies become noticeable. This is why intuition often feels obvious only after the fact. It was always there, but previously hidden beneath urgency. At night, urgency loosens its grip. Thoughts slow, sensations soften. And in that softened state, the mind becomes receptive to guidance that does not come in words. You may feel drawn towards certain memories, certain images, certain feelings, without knowing their relevance. That relevance does not need to be known right now. Intuition does not demand action. It offers orientation. Research in cognitive science suggests that intuitive processing relies heavily on emotional memory, the accumulated record of how past situations felt rather than how they were described. When a current experience resembles an earlier one, emotionally, intuition responds before conscious thought has time to assemble reasons. This happens quietly, instantly. You don't experience the comparison, you experience the result, a sense of ease or resistance, a gentle pull toward or away. In waking life, this can feel confusing. At night, it feels natural, because nothing needs to be done with it. The absence of demand allows intuition to exist without pressure. It doesn't have to prove itself. It doesn't have to be correct. It simply rests there, part of the background awareness that keeps you oriented without effort. You might notice that this awareness feels personal, yet impersonal at the same time. It belongs to you, but it is not shaped by identity or opinion. It feels older than that, more basic. That's because it is. Intuition emerges from processes that evolved long before conscious reasoning. Pattern recognition, emotional evaluation, bodily feedback. These systems develop to keep organisms aligned with their environments, not through analysis, but through responsiveness. Responsiveness does not rush. It waits for the right conditions: calm, predictability, stillness. When those conditions are present, intuition becomes reliable because it is no longer distorted by stress or urgency. You can feel this reliability now as a kind of quiet trust. Not trust in answers, but trust in process. Trust that understanding does not need to be forced. That orientation will emerge naturally when the system is allowed to settle. This trust is deeply restful. It removes the need to monitor your own thoughts. You no longer have to check whether you're thinking correctly, whether you're feeling the right thing. Everything is allowed to be exactly as it is. And in that allowance, intuition breathes. It doesn't arrive with excitement. It doesn't interrupt. It simply exists as a gentle undercurrent guiding attention without drawing it forward. You remain aware but unburdened, present but not focused. The brain favors this state more than it admits. Research suggests that many complex decisions are actually improved when conscious deliberation is reduced, allowing intuitive integration to operate without interference. This is not because intuition is magical, but because it accesses information that conscious thought cannot hold all at once. At night, that access is open. Memory, emotion, sensation, and pattern recognition are no longer separated by task demands. They blend softly, informing one another without conflict. The result is not clarity in the traditional sense. It is coherence. Coherence feels right. You may notice that as coherence settles in the mind, becomes quieter without becoming blank. Awareness remains, but it no longer jumps. It rests. This resting awareness is where intuition feels most at home. It does not need to guide you anywhere tonight. It does not need to tell you anything important. Its presence alone is enough a reminder that beneath thought, beneath effort, there is a steady intelligence maintaining balance without being asked. You don't have to listen closely. It will remain anyway. And as this quiet sense of orientation continues to hold you, gently awareness stays suspended between knowing and not needing to know, supported by systems designed to function best, when nothing is being demanded of them, calm enough to carry you deeper into rest, without instruction. There is a quiet moment when memories stop arriving as stories and begin to arrive as feeling, when you no longer remember what happened, but remember how it felt to be there, and that feeling settles into you without asking for detail or explanation. You don't search for it. It finds you when the mind has softened enough to receive without questioning. Memory and emotion are rarely separate. Neuroscience shows that experiences are not stored as neutral records, but as patterns bound tightly to feelings shaped by the state of the nervous system at the moment they were formed. What you remember later is influenced less by accuracy and more by emotional tone, because emotion acts as a signal for relevance. Relevance determines what lasts. When the brain senses calm, emotional signals become smoother. They no longer spike sharply or demand immediate response. Instead, they spread gently, allowing memories to integrate rather than remain isolated. This integration does not replay events exactly as they occurred. It preserves meaning without preserving strain. You may notice this now as a soft warmth rather than a clear image, a sense of familiarity without a face attached, a feeling that belongs to more than one moment at once. That is memory doing its quiet work, linking experiences through emotion rather than time. Emotion gives memory depth. Research suggests that during low arousal states, the brain's limbic system communicates more fluidly with regions involved in long-term storage, allowing emotional context to guide consolidation. This is why memories associated with calm tend to feel cohesive later, while memories formed under stress often remain fragmented. Calm allows experiences to settle into place without sharp edges. You don't experience this as learning, you experience it as comfort. Comfort is not the absence of memory, it is memory that has found resolution. Even difficult experiences can soften when revisited in a state that no longer requires defense. The brain recognizes that the threat has passed, and emotional charge diminishes naturally over time. Time matters here. Memory does not resolve itself quickly. It requires repeated exposure to safety. Each calm moment adds another layer of reassurance, another signal that the present is different from the past. Over time, these signals outweigh the original intensity, allowing emotion to reorganize itself quietly. You may feel this as a release you didn't know you were holding, a tension that eases without instruction. The body participates in this process. When emotional load decreases, muscle tone adjusts, breathing deepens, and the heart rate slows slightly. These physical shifts send feedback to the brain, reinforcing the message that it is safe to let go. Memory and body move together, each informing the other. This loop is gentle. Nothing is forced. Emotional processing does not demand confrontation or analysis. It unfolds through presence, through the repeated experience of being calm, while remembering, even if remembering happens only as a feeling rather than a thought. The night supports this naturally. Reduced stimulation lowers emotional reactivity. Without constant input, the brain no longer needs to filter aggressively, and emotional signals lose urgency. What remains is a quieter awareness where memory can surface without overwhelming the system. You may notice that memories feel less personal now, less attached to identity. They pass through awareness without insisting on ownership. This distance is not avoidance, it is perspective. The brain is capable of holding experience without becoming entangled when emotional charge has softened enough. Emotion in this state becomes information rather than instruction. It tells the brain how experiences fit together instead of telling it what to do next. This allows learning to persist without demanding action. Meaning accumulates quietly, shaped by repetition rather than attention. You don't need to recall anything deliberately. What matters will return on its own. Neuroscience suggests that emotionally significant memories are more likely to resurface during rest, not because the mind is searching for them, but because reduced interference allows associated networks to activate spontaneously. This spontaneous activation feels like drifting rather than remembering. Drifting is efficient. It allows memory to reorganize without interruption. Instead of replaying events linearly, the brain groups experiences by emotional similarity, strengthening patterns that feel coherent and allowing others to fade. This selective process is not loss. It is refinement. Refinement feels peaceful. You may sense a growing neutrality toward thoughts that once carried weight. They appear lighter now, less demanding. This does not mean they no longer matter. It means they no longer need protection. The nervous system recognizes when emotional balance has been restored. Signals associated with vigilance decrease. Systems associated with repair and regulation increase. The brain reallocates resources toward maintenance rather than response. Maintenance is quiet work. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek recognition. It simply keeps the system aligned, adjusting subtly until equilibrium is restored. Memory, emotion, and body cooperate here, each responding to the same underlying condition of safety. You may notice that awareness feels steadier now, less reactive. Thoughts still arise, but they don't linger. Feelings still pass through, but they don't cling. This is not detachment, it is balance. Balance allows rest to deepen. As emotional tone continues to soften, memory loses its sharpness without losing significance. What remains is understanding without tension, familiarity without demand. This is how the brain prepares itself for sleep, not by shutting down, but by aligning systems so that nothing is pulling too hard in any direction. You don't have to assist this alignment, it happens naturally. And as memory and emotion continue their quiet negotiation, awareness remains present without effort, supported by processes designed to restore coherence when the world grows quiet, steady enough to hold you gently as rest deepens on its own. When the mind settles deeply enough, awareness begins to widen in a particular way, not outward toward noise or movement, but outward toward the idea of connection, as if the sense of being alone gently loosens without needing company or conversation to replace it. You don't imagine anyone, you simply feel less separate than before. Human brains are shaped by relationship. Neuroscience suggests that even in stillness, networks associated with social understanding remain active, quietly mapping familiarity and belonging based on memory and emotional tone. These networks do not require interaction to function. They respond to cues of safety, predictability, and calm, allowing the nervous system to rest in the knowledge that connection exists even when nothing is being exchanged. You feel this as ease. Not excitement, not longing, just ease. During waking hours, social awareness is often busy. It tracks expressions, words expectations. It prepares responses. But at night, when there is nothing to respond to, social cognition softens into something simpler. The brain no longer rehearses conversations. It holds the feeling of being understood without needing proof. This feeling matters. Research shows that perceptions of social safety reduce stress responses even in the absence of others. When the brain senses that connection is available, vigilance decreases, the body relaxes, hormones associated with calm and trust become more influential. Systems designed for repair and regulation are given space to operate. You don't need to think about anyone specific. The feeling stands on its own. Memory contributes quietly here. Experiences of warmth, familiarity, and acceptance leave traces that can be reactivated without detail. At night, when interference drops, these traces surface as atmosphere rather than image, a sense of being held within something larger than yourself, even while physically alone. This is not imagination. It is recall without pictures. The brain stores social experience emotionally as much as cognitively. Tone matters more than content. A calm voice, a steady presence, repeated signals of safety. These patterns are enough to recreate the feeling of connection later when the environment supports it. You may notice that your body responds first. Shoulders drop, breathing deepens. These changes are not deliberate. They are responses to perceived safety. When the nervous system senses that no social evaluation is required, it releases tension that was never consciously held. The body understands belonging as permission to rest. Belonging does not require proximity. Neuroscientists describe a baseline social mode in which the brain maintains a quiet expectation of connection. This expectation stabilizes mood and reduces reactivity. When active demands fade, this baseline becomes more noticeable, not because it is new, but because it is no longer being overridden. You feel this as quiet confidence. Not confidence in yourself, confidence in the moment. The absence of judgment is powerful. Without the need to present or perform, awareness turns inward without shrinking. You are still open, still receptive, but no longer braced. This openness allows empathy to exist without direction, a gentle resonance with humanity rather than with individuals. This resonance is calming. It tells the brain that it is not isolated in its experience, that patterns of feeling are shared, that nothing about this moment is unfamiliar in the larger rhythm of human life. Such reassurance does not require thought. It operates below language-shaping emotional tone without explanation. You may sense a subtle warmth now, not emotional, physiological. Research suggests that feelings of social safety are associated with parasympathetic activation, the branch of the nervous system responsible for rest and restoration. Heart rate slows, muscle tone adjusts. The system shifts toward maintenance rather than response. Maintenance is quiet work. It restores balance by reducing extremes. Emotional peaks soften, lows lift gently. What remains is steadiness, a feeling of being supported without being managed. This steadiness is deeply compatible with sleep, preparing the brain to release control without fear of disconnection. The mind does not miss stimulation in this state. It prefers continuity. Continuity feels like being part of something that does not need attention to continue. The social brain relaxes into this continuity, trusting that connection persists beyond awareness. This trust allows attention to drift without concern for what might be lost. Nothing is lost here. What matters remains available, held in memory and pattern, ready to return when needed. For now, it rests alongside you, part of the background assurance that makes letting go possible. As this sense of connection settles, awareness feels less centered on the self and more distributed, as if the boundaries of experience have softened without dissolving. You are still you, just less defined by edges. Edges are tiring. When they soften, the nervous system saves energy. Saved energy becomes calm. Calm becomes depth. Depth allows rest to deepen naturally without instruction. You don't have to follow this progression. It unfolds on its own. The quiet thread of connection remains present, not pulling attention outward, not demanding engagement, simply reminding the system that it does not have to stand alone. With that reminder in place, vigilance fades further, and the body settles more fully into stillness. Stillness feels safe now. And as awareness continues to rest within this gentle sense of belonging, the mind remains open without effort, supported by the quiet knowledge that connection does not disappear when attention does steady enough to hold you as rest carries you forward. There comes a point when listening turns outward again, not sharply, not suddenly, but with the same patience you've learned to hold inside yourself, as if awareness has grown quiet enough to notice signals that were always present but never demanded attention. You don't strain to hear them. You simply remain open long enough for them to arrive. The earth has always been speaking, not in words, not in events, but in patterns so subtle they disappear beneath daily noise. Tiny shifts in pressure, faint vibrations traveling through stone, variations in temperature that move slower than thought. These signals don't announce themselves, they wait. For most of human history, those signals passed unnoticed, not because they were silent, but because the tools to listen deeply did not yet exist. The ground moved, the rock responded. Energy passed through layers of soil and stone, and all of it went on unrecorded, unmeasured, unasked. You might imagine listening as an active act, leaning forward, concentrating. But modern science has learned that the most revealing signals emerge when observation becomes patient rather than forceful. Sensors do not interrogate the earth. They rest with it. They wait. A sensor is not a question, it is an ear. Ground-based instruments buried quietly beneath the surface register vibrations far too small for the human body to feel. Satellite systems orbit above, watching changes in the land that unfold over months and years rather than seconds. Radar pulses pass downward and return altered, carrying faint information about what lies below. None of this feels dramatic. That's why it works. The Earth responds best to consistency, repeated measurements, stable presence. Research shows that weak signals become meaningful only through accumulation, when thousands of nearly identical observations reveal a deviation that would otherwise look like noise. Noise and signal are not opposites, they are neighbors. The difference between them is patience. You can feel this logic now because your own awareness has learned to slow. The way your mind integrates sensation mirrors the way sensors integrate data. Nothing stands out at first, but over time, patterns emerge. Something repeats, something shifts, something refuses to align with expectation. That refusal is important. In geophysics, anomalies are not answers, they are invitations. A signal that does not fit the surrounding pattern suggests structure, absence, density, or motion that cannot be seen directly. The Earth does not explain itself. It hints. Sensors listen for those hints without interpretation. They do not decide what the anomaly means. They record faithfully, allowing understanding to arrive later through careful comparison and restraint. Restraint is critical. Early interpretations often fail, not because the data is wrong, but because expectation is too strong. When listening is shaped by belief, subtle signals are missed. Modern sensing technology was designed to reduce that influence, to gather information without preference, without narrative, without urgency. You may notice how familiar this feels. Your own mind earlier tonight learned to release urgency, to notice without deciding, to let impressions form before conclusions. This internal quiet is the same condition required for external listening. The ground responds differently when it is not being rushed. Seismic sensors register vibrations from distant events, waves that travel through rock and return, altered by the structures they pass through. Radar instruments send energy downward and receive it back with slight delays that reveal layers invisible from the surface. Satellite systems track minute changes in elevation shifts measured in millimeters, unfolding over seasons rather than moments. Millimeters matter because the Earth does not change quickly where it has endured for thousands of years. Its answers are slow. Any method that demands immediacy will miss them. You don't hear the Earth by asking it to speak louder. You hear it by staying long enough to notice the reply. Modern sensors were built for this kind of listening. Not dramatic discovery, but long attention. Not confirmation, but curiosity. They gather data quietly, sometimes for decades, before patterns become undeniable. This long listening has changed how we understand ancient landscapes. Places once thought static have revealed subtle motion. Structures assumed solid have shown internal complexity. The ground itself has begun to answer questions no one realized could be asked. Answering without words. You may sense a shift now. Awareness that once rested entirely inside you begins to include the world again, but gently, without tension. The same calm that allowed your mind to integrate now allows the Earth to be heard. Listening, it turns out, is not a direction. It is a state. And in that state, both mind and planet reveal what they always have when given enough time and enough quiet to respond. You might notice that listening, once learned, changes the way attention moves through the world, as if the calm you've been holding quietly begins to extend beyond your own thoughts and into the ground beneath you. You're not reaching for information. You're allowing it to approach at its own pace. Modern sensors work the same way. They are designed not to capture moments, but to remain present long enough for patterns to reveal themselves. A single reading means almost nothing. What matters is what repeats, what drifts, what refuses to stay perfectly still. You can imagine a sensor as something precise and mechanical, but precision is not its most important quality. Patience is. Sensors are built to stay, to watch without reacting, to record without interpretation. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses downward and waits for their return, not once, but again and again, letting tiny delays accumulate into meaning. Seismic instruments register vibrations that arrive from faraway waves, altered by every layer of stone they pass through. Satellites measure changes so small, they would be invisible without years of observation. Years matter, because the Earth rarely answers quickly. Ancient landscapes respond slowly, their structures shaped by pressure and time rather than motion and noise. Any system that listens only for sudden change will miss what matters most. Sensors do not listen for certainty, they listen for difference. A difference does not explain itself, it suggests. It invites closer attention. In data, this appears as an anomaly, a deviation from the expected pattern. An anomaly is not a discovery, it is a question the Earth asks back. This exchange is quiet. A radar return arrives slightly later than expected. A seismic wave bends instead of passing straight through. A satellite image shows a surface that rises or sinks by millimeters over seasons. None of these signals announce what they mean. They simply persist. Persistence is the key. Over time, repeated measurements reduce noise. What once looked random begins to organize itself. Patterns form not because the data became clearer, but because the listener stayed long enough to notice what remained consistent. You may recognize this process. Your own mind has been doing something similar tonight. At first, thoughts felt scattered, then gradually certain feelings repeated, certain sensations returned. Meaning emerged not from effort, but from accumulation. Sensors learn this way too. They are not intelligent in the human sense, but the systems that interpret their data are designed to mirror careful attention. Algorithms compare signals across time. Scientists resist early conclusions. Interpretation waits until consistency becomes unavoidable. Waiting is difficult, especially when expectations are strong. Ancient places invite stories. Assumptions form quickly. But modern sensing methods have taught researchers to hold those assumptions lightly, to listen first, to let the Earth respond before deciding what it is saying. This shift changed how many landscapes are understood. Structures once assumed solid have revealed internal complexity. Ground thought uniform has shown variation. What seemed complete has turned out to be layered, altered, shaped by processes still active beneath the surface. These realizations did not arrive suddenly. They emerged slowly as sensors continued their quiet work. Datasets grew longer, comparisons became richer. Confidence replaced speculation, not through excitement, but through restraint. You can feel how compatible this is with the state you're in now. Nothing here is rushing toward meaning. Awareness is wide enough to include uncertainty without discomfort. This openness allows new information to settle gently instead of colliding with belief. Sensors thrive in that openness. They do not confirm what is already known. They challenge it by revealing what does not fit. Over time, these mismatches force understanding to adapt. Not dramatically, but inevitably. Inevitability is powerful. When enough data points align, interpretation changes not because it wants to, but because it must. The ground has been answering all along. The listener simply became capable of hearing it. This is how modern sensing altered what we think we know. Not by uncovering secrets in a single moment, but by replacing assumptions with evidence gathered patiently over years. The Earth did not reveal itself differently. We learned to listen differently. That learning required humility. To accept that early models were incomplete, that certainty was provisional, that listening must continue even after conclusions feel comfortable. Sensors made this humility practical by extending attention beyond the limits of human perception. You don't feel that extension as technology, you feel it as continuity, a sense that the world is deeper than surfaces suggest, that answers arrive layered, partial, and refined over time. This understanding does not provoke urgency. It encourages care. Care slows things down. It keeps listening open. It prevents conclusions from hardening too early. In science, this openness is what allows understanding to grow without collapsing under its own assumptions. You might notice that your own awareness mirrors this now. Thoughts no longer demand resolution. Curiosity feels patient rather than sharp. The mind remains present without insisting on explanation. This is the same condition that allows sensors to work. Listening without pressure, recording without judgment, letting meaning emerge from repetition rather than force. As this approach continues, ancient places begin to feel less mysterious and more responsive. Not because they have been explained away, but because they have been allowed to speak through the only language they use, pattern, persistence, and time. You are not trying to hear the Earth tonight. You are simply learning how listening feels. And in that learning, the boundary between inner calm and outer understanding grows thinner, preparing awareness to receive what comes next, without effort or expectation. You can feel the shift before it is named, the way attention leans gently toward a place rather than an idea, as if the listening you've practiced is ready to settle somewhere specific, not sharply, not with urgency, just with presence. Giza does not announce itself. It rests, stone upon stone, weight layered over time. From the surface, it appears complete, immovable, resolved. And for centuries, that surface shaped what people believed they knew. What could be seen became what was understood. But stone remembers more than it shows. Beneath the limestone casing, beneath the desert floor, the ground holds information in density and voids in the way energy moves through it. These are not secrets in the dramatic sense. They are records written slowly without intention, preserved by pressure and time. Modern sensors approach this record without disturbing it. Radar waves pass downward and return altered by what they encounter. Seismic vibrations travel through layers and change speed where material changes. Satellite measurements track tiny shifts in the plateau, movements too small to notice in a lifetime, yet unmistakable across decades. Nothing is excavated, nothing is opened. Listening happens without touch. For a long time, Giza was interpreted through geometry and alignment, through visible chambers and measured angles. These approaches revealed brilliance, but they also set limits. If something could not be seen or entered, it remained hypothetical. Modern sensing removed that constraint by replacing access with attention. Attention reveals continuity. Radar does not see walls, it senses contrast. A return arrives faster or slower, depending on density, moisture, and structure. Where a stone is uniform, signals behave predictably. Where it is not, signals hesitate. That hesitation is not an answer. It is an indication that the ground is not what expectation assumes. Seismic instruments respond similarly. Vibrations move easily through solid material. They slow bend or scatter where voids or fractures exist. Over time, repeated measurements outline regions that behave differently from their surroundings. These regions do not announce purpose. They announce difference. Difference matters at Giza because the plateau is ancient, layered, and complex. Natural geology, construction, erosion, and human modification overlap. Modern sensing does not attempt to separate these influences immediately. It listens first, allowing patterns to stabilize before interpretation begins. Satellite data adds another dimension. From orbit, instruments detect minute changes in elevation, surface deformation, measured in millimeters. These changes are not dramatic. They unfold slowly, responding to temperature, moisture, and subsurface structure. When patterns repeat across seasons and years, they suggest that the ground beneath the pyramids is not static. Static assumptions fade quietly. As data accumulated, certain areas beneath and around the pyramids began to behave differently from what long-standing models predicted. Signal returns varied, wave paths shifted, subtle anomalies persisted across methods. No single measurement claimed significance. Their agreement did. Agreement is rare. When independent sensing techniques highlight the same regions, the likelihood of coincidence decreases. This convergence does not declare what exists below. It narrows what is plausible. It tells researchers where attention should rest longer, where listening should continue without interruption. You might feel how this mirrors your own awareness now. Nothing is being concluded, but certain sensations have repeated. Certain states have stabilized. Understanding has not arrived as revelation, but as quiet confidence that something coherent is present. The Earth responds in the same way. At Giza, listening longer changed the questions being asked. Instead of what is hidden, the question became, how does the ground behave? Instead of searching for chambers, researchers began mapping responses. Where signals behaved unexpectedly, interpretation slowed rather than accelerated. Slowing is essential. Ancient sites amplify expectation. The desire for discovery can distort listening. Modern sensing counters this by insisting on repetition, on cross-verification, on patience that resists narrative. What emerges is not mystery amplified, but mystery disciplined. Disciplined mystery remains powerful. Because it replaces certainty with evidence-based uncertainty. Models adjust, assumptions soften. The idea of Giza as a finished object gives way to an understanding of Giza as a system interacting with geology, climate, and time. This shift changes what it means to know the site. Knowledge is no longer limited to what can be entered or seen. It extends to how the ground answers when questioned gently. You don't hear those answers as statements. You hear them as consistency, a signal that returns the same way tomorrow, a pattern that holds across seasons, a response that persists across methods. Persistence is convincing. It tells researchers that something beneath the surface influences how energy moves. It does not specify what that something is. It invites further listening, more careful modeling, and restraint in interpretation. At Giza, restraint is respect. The site has endured long enough to outlast urgency. It does not reward haste. Modern sensors by design align with this patience. They allow the Earth to speak at its own pace, revealing structure through repetition rather than disclosure. You may notice how natural this feels now. The calm you've been holding makes it possible to sit with incomplete answers without discomfort, to sense that understanding can deepen without needing to be resolved tonight. This is how thinking changes, not through surprise, but through listening extended beyond habit. Giza did not become different. The way it was heard did. And as attention continues to rest, there steady and unforced, the ground remains responsive, offering information not as spectacle but as pattern, waiting for those willing to listen long enough to notice. You don't feel surprise when certain signals refuse to fade. You feel a quieter response than that, something closer to recognition, as if attention settles more firmly, not because something dramatic happened, but because something consistent keeps returning. The ground does not interrupt. it repeats. In scientific listening, repetition carries weight. A single irregular reading can be dismissed. Noise happens, instruments drift, environments fluctuate, but when the same deviation appears again and again across different conditions, something changes. Curiosity deepens, patience increases, listening becomes more careful. At Giza, this is exactly what occurred. Ground-penetrating radar surveys revealed zones where signal returns behaved differently from surrounding stone. Not dramatically, not sharply, just enough to suggest variation in density or structure beneath the surface. These responses did not vanish with recalibration. They remained. Seismic measurements echoed this persistence. Vibrational waves traveling through the plateau showed subtle alterations in speed and direction in specific regions. The changes were small, but they were stable. Stability matters more than magnitude. You can feel how this mirrors your own experience now. Thoughts that mattered returned quietly. Sensations repeated. What persisted earned attention. Different instruments began to agree. Radar hinted, seismic data supported. Satellite observations added context, revealing surface behaviors that aligned with subsurface irregularities. No single dataset claimed authority. Their convergence did. Convergence narrows uncertainty. It does not explain what lies beneath Giza. It clarifies where assumptions no longer hold. Long-standing models treated the plateau as relatively uniform outside known chambers and passages. The data suggested otherwise, not chaos. Complexity. Complexity does not demand revision immediately. It invites refinement. Researchers responded by slowing down. Additional passes were made. Measurements were repeated under different conditions. Variables were controlled more tightly. The goal was not discovery, but confidence. Confidence emerges slowly. Some anomalies appeared elongated rather than compact. Others suggested layered features rather than empty voids. Importantly, interpretations remained cautious. Density differences can arise from many causes. Geological variation, construction methods, later modification, or natural erosion. Sensors do not distinguish intent. They register effect. Effect is enough to challenge certainty. The presence of unexplained consistency beneath a site so extensively studied forced a shift in posture. Instead of asking what must be there, researchers began asking what processes could produce such signals. This reframing kept interpretation grounded in physics rather than imagination. Physics does not speculate, it constrains. Energy behaves predictably through materials. When it does not, the material demands reconsideration. At Giza, the ground behaved in ways that resisted simple classification. That resistance was informative. You may notice how naturally your mind accepts this now. There is no rush to label, no need to resolve. Awareness holds uncertainty comfortably. This is the same state required for serious interpretation. Anomalies do not equal chambers, they equal attention. In some regions, repeated measurements suggested volumes that absorbed or reflected energy differently than expected. In others, wave behavior implied interfaces where none were predicted. None of these observations declared purpose. They declared difference. Difference accumulates meaning through context. When mapped carefully, these irregularities formed patterns that aligned with neither random geology nor previously mapped structures alone. That alignment did not prove design. It proved that existing models were incomplete. Incomplete models are not failures. They are starting points. Modern sensing did not reveal a secret waiting dramatically beneath Giza. It revealed that the ground's behavior is richer than earlier frameworks allowed. This richness encourages restraint. Each new data set is weighed against others. Agreement is valued more than novelty. You can feel the steadiness of this approach. It does not excite the nervous system, it calms it. Knowing that understanding is earned slowly reduces the impulse to conclude prematurely. This calm is productive. It allows anomalies to remain open questions rather than claims. It respects the site by refusing to reduce it to a single explanation. And it respects the listener by not forcing belief. Over time, what changed was not the data alone, but the confidence with which uncertainty could be held. Researchers grew more comfortable saying, "We do not yet know," because sensors continued to listen faithfully. The Earth continued to answer consistently. Consistency builds trust. Trust allows patience. Patience allows depth. At Giza, depth does not mean digging deeper physically. It means listening longer, allowing more cycles, letting seasons pass, letting data sets grow until patterns speak clearly enough to constrain interpretation without forcing it. You may notice that your own awareness has settled into something similar. There is no pressure to understand everything now. The mind remains open, receptive, unhurried. This is the state in which anomalies become meaningful rather than distracting. Meaning does not arrive as revelation. It arrives as adjustment. Models shift slightly. Assumptions soften. Certainty becomes provisional. This is how knowledge evolves at ancient sites, not through dramatic overturning, but through careful accommodation of what refuses to disappear. The Earth does not insist on being believed. It continues responding anyway. And as attention remains steady, neither excited nor skeptical, the anomalies beneath Giza hold their place quietly, not as answers, but as reliable invitations to keep listening deep enough to change understanding without ever needing to raise its voice. You don't notice the change at first, not because it is small, but because it does not arrive as an announcement. It feels more like a gentle realignment, the way understanding shifts when it no longer needs to defend itself. Nothing dramatic happens, and yet nothing is quite the same. For a long time, Giza was understood as a collection of finished objects, monuments completed in the past, preserved into the present. Knowledge focused on form alignment and visible space. What could be entered, measured, and mapped became the boundaries of certainty. Those boundaries softened. Modern sensing did not contradict what was known. It extended it. The pyramids did not lose their geometry. Their alignments did not change. What changed was the assumption that what mattered had already been accounted for. Accounting is different from understanding. As repeated measurements accumulated, models began to adjust in subtle ways. The plateau was no longer treated as a passive foundation. It became an active participant in the site's story. Density variations mattered. Layering mattered. The way energy moved through stone mattered. This shift reframed questions. Instead of asking whether something hidden existed, researchers asked how the ground behaved across time. Instead of focusing on isolated features, attention moved toward relationships between surface-subsurface and environment. Giza became less like a static artifact and more like a system. Systems require patience. In a system, no single measurement explains everything. Meaning emerges through interaction. Radar responses gain context through seismic behavior. Surface deformation gains meaning when compared across seasons. Consistency across methods becomes more important than resolution within one. This approach altered certainty without erasing it. Older models were not discarded. They were revised, adjusted, constrained more carefully by data that extended beyond direct access. The confidence that once came from visibility alone gave way to confidence earned through convergence. Convergence feels different. It does not inspire quick conclusions. It supports stable ones. When multiple sensing techniques point in the same direction, interpretation becomes quieter rather than louder. The need to persuade fades. Evidence holds its own weight. You may notice how naturally your mind accepts this now. There is no urge to resolve every question. Curiosity feels calm. Understanding feels provisional without feeling weak. This is the posture that modern science has adopted at ancient sites like Giza. Provisional knowledge is not uncertainty. It is honesty. The most significant change was not the discovery of a specific structure. It was the recognition that the subsurface matters even when it resists clear definition, that what lies beneath influences stability, preservation, and interpretation in ways that cannot be ignored, simply because they are difficult to visualize. Difficulty no longer ends inquiry. Sensors allowed researchers to continue listening, where excavation would be disruptive or impossible. They made it acceptable to know without touching, to infer without entering. This expanded what counted as legitimate evidence. Legitimacy broadened quietly. The idea that understanding must come from exposure gave way to the idea that response is enough. If the ground answers consistently, it deserves attention even if it cannot be opened. This change affected interpretation beyond Giza. It influenced how archaeologists think about ancient sites more broadly. The emphasis shifted toward non-invasive study, long-term monitoring, and restraint in conclusion. Knowledge became something cultivated rather than extracted. Cultivation takes time. It values continuity over revelation. It allows models to evolve, gradually responding to new data without collapsing under it. At Giza, this meant accepting that the site's story is not finished, simply because construction ended thousands of years ago. the environment continues to interact with what was built. Interaction is ongoing. Temperature cycles, moisture movement, and geological structure all play roles in how the site behaves today. Sensors revealed these influences not as threats, but as context. Giza exists within the Earth, not apart from it. This understanding changes perspective. The pyramids are no longer isolated marvels frozen in time. They are participants in a larger physical system, responding to forces that move slowly, but persistently. Modern sensing made this participation visible without making it intrusive. You may feel how this reframing settles in you. It does not demand awe, it encourages respect. Respect for complexity, respect for uncertainty, respect for the idea that understanding deepens best when approached gently. Gentleness preserves clarity. When urgency recedes, interpretation becomes steadier, claims become narrower, confidence becomes quieter. This is not a loss of wonder, it is a refinement of it. Wonder no longer needs spectacle. It rests in the realization that ancient knowledge and modern measurement can coexist without one diminishing the other. That listening longer can change what we think we know without overturning what we already understand. This is what changed. Not the stones themselves, not their placement, but the way listening is valued. And as that value continues to shape inquiry, awareness remains open, unforced, and patient, ready to let understanding continue evolving without needing to arrive all at once. You may feel the attention widen now, not pulling away from Giza, but allowing it to rest within a larger landscape of understanding, as if the calm you've been holding finally has enough space to breathe. The stones remain where they are. The ground still responds, but the meaning of that response feels less confined to a single place. Listening, it turns out, was never meant to stop at one site. The same methods that learned to hear. Giza learned to hear coastlines settling under rising seas, volcanoes breathing before eruption fault lines, adjusting their long-held tension. Sensors that rested patiently beneath the pyramids rest just as patiently beneath forests, deserts, and oceans. They do not change their posture, only the context changes. Context gives signals direction. When patterns repeat across landscapes, understanding grows steadier. Tiny surface movements detected by satellites reveal slow deformation in mountain ranges. Seismic networks register whispers of motion far from any earthquake. Radar surveys outline buried river channels where water once moved freely. None of these observations are dramatic on their own. Together, they suggest a planet constantly responding to forces that act quietly and persistently. You don't need to imagine these forces. You can feel the idea of them. The Earth is not silent between events. It is continuously adjusting, redistributing pressure, moisture, and energy. Sensors make this adjustment legible by refusing to focus only on moments of change. They value continuity. They value patience. This value reshaped scientific thinking. Instead of waiting for the Earth to break its quiet, researchers learned to listen through it. Instead of prioritizing spectacle, they learned to trust accumulation. A single tremor says little. A decade of near-identical measurements says more than words can. Giza fits into this philosophy naturally. Its anomalies are not isolated mysteries. They are expressions of the same principle that understanding deepens when listening extends beyond immediacy. The plateau answers slowly because it was shaped slowly. Expecting clarity on human timescales distorts the question. Distortion fades when patience grows. Modern sensing aligns human inquiry with geological time. It allows questions to be asked in a way the Earth can respond to honestly. This alignment reduces the need for forceful interpretation. It replaces urgency with care. Care preserves accuracy. As this approach spread, it influenced how scientists spoke about uncertainty. Unknowns were no longer framed as gaps to be filled quickly, but as regions of attention deserving more time. This reframing softened the relationship between knowledge and doubt. Doubt became a signal to listen longer, not a failure to understand. You may notice how comfortable this feels now. Uncertainty no longer tightens the chest. The mind rests easily with the idea that understanding is provisional, shaped by evidence that grows slowly. This comfort mirrors the posture of modern Earth science. Confidence does not come from final answers. It comes from reliable methods applied patiently. Patience reveals coherence. Across disciplines, the same pattern appears. Climate models improve not through single breakthroughs, but through decades of data refinement. Geological histories sharpen as layers are revisited with new tools. Archaeological interpretations stabilize when non-invasive methods add context without disruption. Listening becomes cumulative. What matters is not the loudest signal, but the one that remains when noise fades. This principle guided interpretation at Giza, and it guides interpretation elsewhere. It encourages humility without diminishing insight. Humility strengthens trust. Trust allows science to move slowly without losing momentum. It keeps inquiry open, receptive, and resilient. When new data arrives, it is integrated rather than resisted. Models shift gently. Understanding grows without collapse. You can feel this rhythm now, as part of your own awareness. Thoughts do not rush. Curiosity does not demand. Attention remains steady, wide enough to include the world without narrowing around conclusions. This steadiness is rare. It is the state in which both learning and rest deepen together, where the mind remains engaged without strain, where listening becomes a way of being rather than an act. Giza, in this view, is not a puzzle to be solved once. It is a place that continues to teach by responding consistently to careful attention. Its lesson is not about what lies hidden, but about how understanding unfolds when urgency is released. The Earth offers the same lesson everywhere. It does not reveal itself all at once. It responds over time in patterns that reward those willing to stay present without insisting on immediacy. Sensors made this possible by extending human attention beyond its natural limits, allowing listening to continue long after focus would otherwise fade. You are experiencing that extension now. Awareness remains open, calm, and receptive, holding both Giza and the wider Earth within the same quiet frame of understanding. Nothing needs to be concluded. Nothing needs to be resolved tonight. Listening has already done its work. And as that listening continues beyond this moment, awareness rests comfortably within a world that answers not with declarations, but with consistency steady enough to support understanding that grows softly without ever needing to announce its arrival. You may feel how the need to hold the story begins to loosen now, not because it has ended, but because it no longer needs to be carried so carefully. The ideas are still here. Giza remains. The Earth continues its quiet responses, but attention no longer circles them. It rests beside them. This is where understanding learns to pause. Science does not always move forward by asking more. Sometimes it moves forward by allowing what has already been gathered to settle. Data rests. Models breathe. Questions remain open without pulling at the mind. This pause is not inactivity. It is preparation. You can feel the difference. Earlier curiosity leaned forward. Now it reclines. The nervous system recognizes that nothing is required in this moment. No conclusion must be reached. No explanation must be secured before rest is allowed. This permission is important. When questions are allowed to rest, the mind integrates what it has received without effort. Research suggests that consolidation deepens when cognitive demand drops, allowing networks involved in memory and meaning to stabilize quietly. Understanding does not disappear when attention softens. It settles into place. You don't lose what you've heard. You release the need to hold it. At ancient sites like Giza, this pause mirrors the work itself. After measurements are taken, after comparisons are made, there is waiting. Data sits. Patterns are revisited slowly. Interpretation matures over time rather than arriving fully formed. Maturity is calm. It does not hurry towards certainty. It trusts continuity. The same patience that allows the Earth to be heard allows understanding to deepen without being forced. You may notice how natural this feels now. Thoughts pass without engagement. Images soften before they fully form. The story no longer asks to be followed from beginning to end. It simply remains present as atmosphere. Atmosphere is enough. The mind does not require narrative to rest. It requires safety. And safety comes from the sense that nothing important is being missed by letting go. The Earth will continue responding. Science will continue listening. You do not need to remain awake to ensure it. This realization eases effort further. Breathing deepens without instruction. Muscles release where they were never consciously tense. Awareness narrows slightly, then widens again, finding a comfortable rhythm between presence and drifting. In this state, questions become lighter. They no longer press for answers. They rest alongside curiosity without urgency. This is not forgetting. It is trust. Trust that understanding persists even when attention fades. The same sensors that listen patiently do not stop recording when no one is watching. They continue quietly gathering information that will be understood later. In the same way, Your mind continues integrating long after conscious focus dissolves. Integration is quiet work. It does not announce progress. It reveals itself later as clarity that feels unearned insight that arrives without effort. Tonight, none of that is required. The work is already underway. You may sense a gentle pull towards stillness now. Not sleep yet, just rest. A soft hovering between awareness and release where nothing needs to be named. This hovering is comfortable. It allows the story to remain incomplete without feeling unfinished. Giza remains complex. The earth remains responsive. Science remains open-ended. And all of this can coexist without tension. Tension dissolves when nothing is demanded. As attention relaxes further, the boundaries of thought soften. What remains is a simple sense of continuity, the feeling that everything important is held somewhere beyond immediate awareness. You are not stepping away from understanding. You are allowing it to continue without you. This allowance creates space for sleep to approach naturally without instruction or effort. The mind recognizes that it is safe to let go now that questions can remain unanswered without consequence. And as this recognition settles in, awareness drifts gently supported by the quiet confidence that listening does not end when you rest steady enough to carry both curiosity and calm into the silence that follows. You don't need to follow the story anymore. It has already settled around you light enough to stay without being held. The listening that once felt deliberate has softened into background presence like a sound you no longer notice because it has always been there. The earth continues, quietly. Stone remains where it has rested for ages. Sensors keep their patient watch. Patterns continue forming without needing attention. And you here are allowed to let go of the need to witness any of it. Letting go does not mean leaving. It means trusting continuity. Your breathing finds its own rhythm now. Inhale, pause, exhale, no instruction needed. The body remembers how to rest without being told. Muscles loosen where they can. Thought thins where it wishes. Nothing needs correction. The mind drifts the way water drifts, not forward, not back, just gently downward towards stillness. You may feel images soften before they fully form, a sense of place without edges, a feeling of understanding without words. This is not forgetting. It is integration completing itself quietly out of view. Night has always supported this work. Long before sensors learned to listen, long before questions were shaped carefully, the world learned how to rest by following rhythms that do not rush. Darkness does not erase the day. It absorbs it, holds it, carries it forward in a different form. You are being carried now. Awareness narrows slightly, then widens again, as if it is deciding how much it wants to keep. There is no wrong choice. Whatever remains can stay. Whatever fades is allowed to fade. Nothing important is lost here. The earth does not stop responding when you close your eyes. Sensors do not stop recording when no one is watching. Understanding does not stop growing when attention dissolves. These processes were never dependent on effort. Effort was always optional. As sleep approaches the boundary between inner and outer, grows thinner, then softer, then less distinct. Thoughts no longer need to connect. Sensations no longer need explanation. The body recognizes the familiar signals of safety and release. Release feels like relief. It arrives without ceremony, a gentle easing into gravity, a willingness to be held rather than holding. The mind accepts that it does not need to stand guard. Guarding ends here. What remains is quiet continuity, the same continuity that allowed ancient stone to endure, the same continuity that allowed patient listening to change understanding without force, the same continuity that now allows rest to deepen naturally. You don't need to understand any of this. Just rest. Let curiosity do the listening. And as curiosity softens too, turning inward and then drifting away, sleep moves closer without announcement. The world does not ask anything of you now. It continues on its own, steady and responsive, while you are free to drift beyond attention. Breath slows, thought thins, awareness loosens its edges. You are not leaving the story. You are becoming part of its quiet. Sleep arrives the way the earth answers, not all at once, not loudly, but steadily, patiently, until there is nothing left to do but rest. Sleep well, dream gently, good night.